I'm Hug, and I am currently a Chéide. There's a reason for that. The audio gear I use for recording is, borked, so I'm using my podcasting mic. These chibis are courtesy of my wonderful wife, Red. Links to her social media can be found in the description and the cards. Go Commissioner! She'd love to draw your character. I know I'm ripping off overly sarcastic productions here, but this is literally just until I get a new mic, so I don't think they'll care that much. By the way, go sub to them if you haven't already. They're way better than I am. Today's video is a little bit different. We're not going to talk about Irish folklore, though don't worry, the Land and She video is being scripted and I'm getting some help with it. We're going to talk about internet folklore. What constitutes internet folklore, you may ask? Well, it's pretty simple. Conspiracy theories, cryptids, memes, and creepypasta are all examples of internet folklore. They're all aspects of the cultures of specific communities generated and changed and developed by those communities as a whole, which is more or less the definition of what folklore is. Today's subject is something I stumbled upon years ago while I was in the middle of studying folklore at UCD in Dublin. I spent countless nights on my laptop poring over as much information on the subject as possible, while constantly going back and forth to my various books and notes from class. Bathed in the sickly glow of the screen, I read forum posts and studied images and watched countless hours of footage. Tracing the origin and development, watching the different stories and different versions of the creature spin out and spread and grow apart from one another. Fascinated to be watching this process that normally takes hundreds of years happening in the span of months or years at most. It took over my life in a strange way, and the effects it had are with me to this day. Even though it's fallen out of favour online, it will always be looming just over my shoulder. This one folkloric figure was what taught me that the internet has its own folklore that grows much faster than the analog kind. It led me to creating content for YouTube in the first place. I used to run a horror web series on a different channel because of this thing, though it never actually featured. This one creature was how I met my wife. The figure I refer to is the Slenderman.
Things that bother you never bother me. I feel happy and fine, ha-ha! Living in the sunlight, loving in the moonlight, having a wonderful time. Having got a lot, I don't need a lot, coffee's only a dime. Living in the sunlight, loving in the moonlight, having a wonderful time.
Why do I call the Slenderman in particular folklore? Well, for one, there's debate about the creature's origin, both textually and metatextually. In the actual text of the Slenderman mythos, there are almost as many origins of the Slenderman as there are stories about him. However, the ones that work best tend to be the ones that leave the origin vague and uncertain. One of these origins involves a Hans Holbein woodcut from the 1400s, in which a depiction of death skewering a knight was photoshopped to resemble a figure not unlike the Slenderman called Der Grossman, and passed off as being from a similar period to the original. All of these conflicting textual origin stories, all of these different ideas of how it started, they are a common thread within many kinds of folklore. You will have different origins for different heroes depending on who's telling the story, what part of the world you're in, what part of a particular nation you're in. The village you're living in now might have a different origin story for your hero than the village 10 minutes down the road. It can depend. That's a very, very key aspect to folklore. Metatextually, the Slenderman's origin was on the Something Awful forum on a thread about creating spooky photoshopped images. You can still look at the original thread, and there's an archive preserving all of the images who lost their original hosting site. However, despite this fact, despite the fact that we know for a fact that Eric Knudsen, aka Victor Surge, created the first few images and have documented and easily accessed evidence of that fact, some people still believe that Der Grossman is a real piece of German folklore dating back to at least the mid-1400s, and that is where the Slenderman really came from, despite the fact that there is no evidence for this whatsoever. And that, my friends, is folk belief. Solid, legitimate folk belief. Like many folkloric figures like Fionn McCool or King Arthur or Robin Hood or Mulan, there's a set of common characteristics to the Slenderman that remain constant in most depictions, while small details change from story to story depending on the teller. With the Slenderman, these set characteristics are: he's tall, thin, wears a black suit, has no face, is pale, and is associated with woods. However, depending on the story you're looking at, the Slenderman might be capable of time travel. It might have tentacles, it might have spider legs, it might wear a hat, it might work alone, it might have 1 or 2 minions, it might be worshipped by a cult. Its motivations and actions also change depending on the story. Maybe it wants to drive people mad, maybe it punishes bad children, maybe it's aggressively territorial over the woods, maybe it's a fairy kidnapping people. Sometimes it's evil and malevolent, sometimes it's neutral and just exists, only hurting people as an unavoidable consequence of its existence. This is such a common theme with folkloric figures. You'll not only have dozens, if not hundreds, of conflicting stories making conflicting claims about one figure from folklore, you'll often have dozens of versions of the same story that directly contradict each other. Because a big part of what separates folklore from literature is the fact that folklore has no official set canon. In fact, it literally can't have one. Fixed canon and free-form community storytelling are mutually exclusive concepts. So why did the Slenderman become such a popular folkloric figure? I think it's largely because the original ideas and stories put forward were so vague. In them, the Slenderman didn't really embody anything, it was just a thing to be scared of. The black suit and lack of face add to this. It's the monster equivalent of an everyman. It's kind of like Luke Skywalker. He has no real personality traits, so anyone could project themselves on him. The Slenderman has no real distinguishing traits, so you can project anything onto it. Any fear you might want to represent, you can easily project onto this tall, faceless creature. Loneliness, mental illness, abuse, modernization, surveillance, war, even contradictory fears like industrialization and a fear of nature can both be represented equally well by this creature. But if the Slenderman works so well to represent any kind of fear, why has it declined in popularity so much lately? I could blame this on some unfortunate incidents that happened in the past few years that I'm not going to go into here, but the reality is probably we just saw too much of him. So many people made so much Slenderman content, we all got a little desensitized. Old man Slender lost a lot of his impact, and we just got a little tired of him. But as far as I can see, good old skinny jeans is a permanent part of the social consciousness now. As indelible as Cinderella or the Big Bad Wolf. Give it another generation or two, I bet there'll be a Slenderman resurgence. I'm sorry, but whenever I see this picture of the Slenderman, this is all I can think of. Seriously, Fat Boy Slender. Gonna be a thing. Real thing. Promise. Trust me. I thought it would be fun to talk about the Slenderman because it's actually, now that I think about it, since having started writing this script, a really, really important part of my life, which is just so weird to say. The Slenderman is an important part of my life. But it's true. It's actually, unfortunately, true. Thank you again for watching this, and thank you to my patrons, like the inordinately generous Kevin Smith, whose pledge tier is... He's got his own unique pledge tier that no one else will ever be. The fucking mysterious kind cryptid tier. That's Kevin Smith. That's that tier. Neil McConvra, Casper Maynard, and the patrons you see scrolling here, and all of the patrons that you don't see scrolling here, because there's a few of those too, and they're also great. And thank you, non-patrons who are watching and hitting like or sharing my videos, because that's great as well. I really appreciate any kind of support, all forms of support you can give. It all makes me happy and makes me appreciate you all a lot. So yeah, that's a thing. Because I like the applause, because, as I keep saying, your applause is the only way to counteract my daily chant if I don't believe in fairies.